Hey, hi! Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is The Other Thing I Do. My guest this week is Ben Blacker, a writer and producer who's basically done a little of everything. Television, features, comic books, and some excellent podcasts, including Dead Pilot Society and The Writers Panel. His latest project is the Audible series Cut and Run, which he wrote and produced with his writing partner, Ben Acker, and I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the Bens are responsible for one of my very favorite things in the whole wide world, the Thrilling Adventure Hour, which ran for a decade in Los Angeles and is still around in podcast form. If you've never had the pleasure, go look it up. It's wonderful stuff, and I was honestly thrilled a few years ago when it turned out that Ben Blacker was a fan of my thing. So I got him to do it. And Ben picked Gremlins, Joe Dante's delirious 1984 horror comedy about a young man who gets a strange pet for Christmas and in no time at all finds his entire town overrun by little green mischief makers. Inspired in equal parts by the Looney Tunes shorts of the 40s and the low-budget creature features of the 50s, it's a weird, unquantifiable roller coaster ride that breaks just about every rule of narrative and tone and still manages to be its own specific thing. Also, it has breakdancing. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I love Gremlins. That's why. I don't know. I was trying to think of like what my origin story for Gremlins is, and I feel like it's just always been part of my life.
Right.
I was a monster kid for sure when I was little. I grew up in Boston, and on Saturdays, Channel 56, WLVI, the local station, would show Creature Double Feature. And my dad and I would watch those, and it was always like a Godzilla movie and then some other thing, often from like the Universal Vault. So it was where I saw and fell in love with Creature from the Black Lagoon, but they did like Tarantula and Them, I remember, was like a big one for me. So yeah, I always loved monster stuff, and I would have been 8 years old when Gremlins came out. And I don't think I saw it in the theater. I don't think my parents would have brought me to that. But I do remember that I had the comic book adaptation that Marvel had the licensing rights to just a ton of Warner Brothers properties. So they did these adaptations, and I devoured that thing. And it was clearly like that made as big an impression on me as the movie did when I finally saw it, which was probably maybe a year later.
Right.
Like whenever it was available on home videos.
Yeah, it was. I remember it took a while. I was 16 right? when it came out, and I think it was maybe the next spring that it came out, just because it kept going theatrically. In fact, try explaining that to people now, that there used to be a FOMO of movies. If you didn't see it in the theater, it might never come back.
Yeah, it's true.
But Gremlins, I remember there was a reissue that summer, or it came out in 84. There was a reissue in the summer of 85, and it was already on video at the time. But it was a thing that Amblin was really gung-ho on. They held back a lot just because stuff played. It just never went away. So, yeah, it would have been, I think, sense. Yeah, maybe early. It's weird that it, like, in my brain is saying, no, it must have been a Christmas video release. It's a Christmas movie. But it wasn't. It actually came out later. I remember that.
It came out
theatrically in the summer and then video in the spring. Yeah, same day as Ghostbusters, which is
same day as Ghostbusters,
bizarre,
which I love. Yeah, and I must have seen it when it came on video in the spring, because I do remember going to day camp that summer with my friends, and we were obsessed. And like, I have such a specific memory of like I hated camp. What do I want to sit outside in the dirt? Like, it was not fun for me.
Yeah.
So we had to take tennis where we just hit, and I guess there were only so many courts, so a bunch of us had to just go hit balls against a wall. And behind this wall were these deep woods. And we would just hit the ball into the woods so we could go back there and get scared that there were gremlins back there. Like, that is a distinct feeling and memory that I have. From that time, from that movie. And again, like, because I was obsessed with the comic book adaptation, I had the story. I knew everything about this movie before going to watch it.
Right.
And in fact, when I rewatched it before talking to you the other night, I was surprised that there were not scenes that I remembered in the movie, because I haven't seen it in a couple of years, and really just a couple of years. But I was like, I thought there was a scene where they found Judge
Reinhold's character in the bank. Yes, it's
Yeah.
because it's in the comic book and it's in the novelization. Yeah,
Exactly.
I found myself wondering that. We just watched it the other night too, because Kate, as it turns out, my wife had never seen it, and spent the entire first half thinking this is a really ragged looking movie. Like the lighting's weird, it's messy, it feels like it was thrown together on the fly, and then once it just tilts into splatter, because it really that gear shift, it goes from second to fifth in terms of spectacle, and then she just kept saying they put this in front of children, they encouraged this for children. and I found myself waiting for stuff that I knew had been shot and wasn't in the film. And the Judge Reinhold bank scene is like, did they find him, or am I just remembering the text version of that?
Yeah, because he just kind of goes away after that scene at the pub, and you think he's coming back because he's set up as a villain. Polly Holliday's set up as a villain. Like, they have these characters that you want to see the Gremlins get.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you expect him, and then there was another scene. It might have been the Gremlins tying up the dog.
Oh, that's right. Because
I
they just
remember from the comic books, but in the movie, it's that he just finds it. Billy
Barney
just finds the dog hanging.
Poor Barney.
Poor Barney is. Listen, I told you we were going to talk about this.
Yeah, and let's do this.
You know, we'll get into everything you want to talk about, but that dog is great. That dog does some amazing acting. His reactions to the puppets are so much fun to watch, and you clearly see that this dog is trying to figure these puppets out.
Yeah, it's not
adorable.
that he's not staring off at his trainer. No. He's not looking at a treat. He's engaged. There's something going on. I really, because you mentioned it, I paid attention to it this time. And it's just because I had offhandedly joked, like, there's probably one take from every scene where the dog grabs a puppet and runs off with it. But I don't think he's going to approach them. There is that one moment where he comes at Gizmo in the very beginning and snaps back.
Yep.
And maybe the puppet freaked him out, and maybe they shot in sequence. I don't know, but it's just, he's wary. He is actually projecting confusion and uncertainty.
It's really great, and you can tell that the director knew that they were onto something with this dog, because there are so many cutaways to the dog reacting when there don't need to be. And I know that, like, Gremlins both suffered from and benefited from, like, the Jaws problem. Which was the creatures were hard to manage because they were doing a lot of stuff on the fly, and I think that it's a better movie for it in the same way Jaws is. It's like you don't get to see full Gremlins that frequently until you're bombarded with them and like the last third.
And then there's that moment now, too, where there's the stop motion scene where they all come out of the darkness, which is
so beautiful.
And it's so clearly, lovingly, like, Harryhausen-y. It's not perfect. It's not smooth.
Yeah.
It's celebrating that. But then there's the shot in the theater, and it took me like a second this time to think, no, those are all built and moving. They're I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of them on some kind of stick that just waves them back and forth. But there must have been, 200, 300 puppets in one shot, and the ones in the foreground are all being operated. There's activity. None of this is digital. None of this is whatever the other process, Go Motion, the stop motion process that Phil Tippett came up with. It's all happening on set, which means they had to hollow out a movie theater.
And it was, I watched some of the commentary track for the movie, which I really enjoyed. I wasn't sure how it would be, but it's with Joe Dante. Is his name Chris Wallace, who's the
puppeteer
designer, and then one of the producers, I forget his name, and I was a little wary of it, and I'll tell you why in a sec, but it's a great commentary, just mostly from a creature standpoint. Is like they really go deep on how they shot this stuff, and everything was on sets. There was maybe one location shoot, and the sets, like it's Muppet Show sets. They were all on rises, or they had, there was a pit under the house where they would just have these puppeteers down there on monitors. And so I imagine in that movie theater scene, right, it had to be elevated.
I assume, just like bleachers or something.
And then just hundreds of puppeteers.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. And they talk about all the different kinds of puppets with the various kinds of articulation. I don't know. It's so interesting to me, and I fear it is a dying art form, especially in horror, where I think you want that physicality. I mean, I think of something like Attack the Block, which had a great combination of CG and physical effects, and like you feel it. It makes a difference.
Yeah.
What a director does and what a director brings to a feature, and I think it's appropriate in regards to Gremlins, because I think Joe Dante is a really interesting director who has not made a ton of great movies.
Yeah,
and
he follows his interests, absolutely.
He really does, and his interests aren't always where certainly I want to go.
Yeah.
Like, to me, Gremlins is the best case scenario where he gets to have the playfulness that he clearly loves, but he has Spielberg looking over his shoulder telling him how to make a movie for people.
Yeah. Well, just
it has an emotional hook.
Yeah, the idea that Gizmo was not a character, like Gizmo and Stripe were the same character in the original drafts, and then Spielberg was the one who said, no, you have to give them one you can root for.
Yeah.
That completely changes everything, because otherwise, and I was thinking about this when I first found that out, it's like, well, otherwise that means Billy is hunting and murdering his pet. And you can't, I mean, you can, I'm sure you can. There are movies like that.
Sure. But it's a different movie.
Yeah, it's not this one.
No.
Where it's playful and you have, Gizmo being a voice of reason, and again, Dante's leanings towards not cruelty exactly, but enjoying the ickiness of a B movie.
Well, and it's cartoon cruelty, right? Like, he loves cartoons, and he loves, it is that B movie stuff that he clearly loves.
The handmade, real blood kind of splattery thing. But I did notice the thing that I noticed. I remember seeing Gremlins. I saw it theatrically 4 or 5 times, because that was, that's what a 16-year-old does in the summer of 1984.
Fantastic.
And I remember there was this one theater, the Eglinton Theater in Toronto, which is an old 70 Mill house, just beautiful movie palace. It's long since closed. But I remember at one point just knowing the film well enough that I could just watch the frame and just see all the other stuff that was going on, and realizing that the gremlin that gets stabbed with the kitchen knife on the cutting board doesn't die right away. That gremlin struggles to pull the knife out in multiple shots. And there was that, and then there's this weird way that I think I only noticed it this time when Gizmo is first giving birth, when he first spawns other gremlins. He suffers a great deal in the corner, and Dante doesn't care. Like, he's really interested in the other things growing out of him, and there's this one shot of the puppet with this agonized face and Howie Mandel squealing, and that is not important to the movie. Like, there's a level of casual sadism towards the monsters and some of the humans that I think really makes it work.
Absolutely.
The fact that Stripe isn't just pushing people over, but he's clawing, scraping them, and trying to gut Billy at one point, but he misses and gets his chest instead of his stomach. There is a meanness that I find absolutely wonderful. And you just know, like Spielberg coming off Poltergeist with Tobe Hooper and letting him do just a little bit with the scene where someone pulls his face off, or the scene where at the very end where there are genuine shocks. But for the most part, that's a very Spielberg-y horror movie, in that it's glossy and pretty, and until flesh comes off, everything is very gossamer and curious.
That still feels like a Spielberg movie.
Yeah, and this one feels like the two of them are fighting over the throttle.
It does, in the best way.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Like, I love that kind of tension leading to something greater than either of them, right? Like, Spielberg already got to make E.T., and there's so much E.T. DNA in Gremlins.
Oh, very much,
that adding Dante's sort of gleeful cruelty to it makes it something entirely other.
Yeah, and that happens in the second half much more, obviously, because that's where it feels like, I mean, the reason I wonder if they shot it in sequence is partially because they're destroying so much of the sets. Like, the lots are, the whole thing was shot in backlot, but they are ruining stuff left and right. Carpets are and walls and things are on fire and explode. Traffic lights exploding, and you can reset, but why would you?
As I was watching the, just to interrupt for a second, as I was watching the commentary track, they talked about that gremlin in the blender section.
Yeah.
And they said the first take of that, the set was painted with gremlin guts. And it was just way too much. So I think that, like, that's interesting to me too, is like, you look at Gremlins 2, where Dante is pretty much set loose to do what he wants, and it's not good.
Oh, really? You're not
on this? Oh, we can get into it.
We'll get to that, yeah.
But, like, in this, like, he knows where the line is. He doesn't go, I think, too frequently too far into either violence or gore or cartoonishness or silliness. And I think that's part of what makes this great. Like, there's stuff where, like, I think it's one of the Gremlins shakes off a blow and you get the Tweety Bird sound effect.
Yeah.
Which is like, I do not care for that. But there's something so charming about it, too, because this story takes place not in our world. Yeah. And I think that's part of the backlot set of it, is it's setting you up for something that is a movie world, right? It's not necessarily the real world.
Yeah, it's hard to tell when it's taking place. I mean, it's modern-ish, but because so much stuff is Rand Peltzer-fied, it's really hard to get a beat on exactly when this is. And that also works towards Billy and Kate, who are adults, and
yeah.
It's hard to tell. I mean, it feels like they're probably 1 year out of high school. They're like, it's clear that they're also both doing these bank jobs to support their family. And Kate's also helping Dory to take extra shifts for free because she's a good person and kind-hearted. It does feel like, because, Judge Reinhold's character says, like, you're keeping your family afloat to Billy as an insult, but it's like, it's a really decent, dignified thing for a kid to be doing.
And I love that there's that aspect of, like, the economic world of 1984 happening in this. And I think, like, you see that in Goonies, too. Like, it's a thing that seems very real to Spielberg and his movies, especially in that era where, and it's in E.T. also.
Yeah,
and I think it's in Poltergeist also, where, like, these take place in a suburban world of the middle class, or even the lower middle class, but very, like, a firmly real world represented there, even though it's a heightened world around them.
Yeah, Reaganomics has not reached Kingston Falls, right? Like, they're still kind of struggling with that.
I do remember reading years ago, this must have been in college, some academic essay about the Gremlins representing the Reaganomics or something like that. Sure.
Well, they are capitalists. They absolutely
That's
are.
True.
They gobble up and destroy everything in their path, and they like shiny things except for fire.
Amazing.
I mean, I'm trying to figure out how many movies now work as late capitalism allegories, just because that's where we are. Jaws, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Which is celebrating its 45th anniversary today, and is just like, you give Hooper an iPad and nothing changes. Everything else is exactly the same. It's amazing. That film does not date.
No.
Except that there is exactly one black person in the entire film, and he's glimpsed in the ferry sequence, and it's jarring because right up until then, an hour in, you're like, oh, and then.
Well, yeah. Having grown up in Boston and Cape Cod, I can tell you that's pretty representative.
Yeah.
These are racist places.
Yeah, that's fair.
I want to talk about the tone shift that you had mentioned.
Sure.
Because I think it's so fascinating, and it's a thing that I haven't seen done as successfully anywhere but maybe Tremors, which I think, has a similar kind of tone to Gremlins.
Yeah.
Or at least the same sort of, like, it's drawing from a lot of the same material. It has a lot of the comedy and horror that, Gremlins has.
Yeah.
But that scene that you mentioned when Billy's mom stabs the gremlin, I rewatched it with my wife, and I don't think she had seen it, or she had never seen all of the movie, because I usually watched it on Christmas Eve when her family would go to church and I would stay home. And so I was like, it's Gremlins time.
Yeah.
So she hadn't seen it, and if she had, it had been a long time. And when that gremlin got stabbed, that's brutal.
It really is.
Like, it's not the cartoon stuff that comes before it, which is, oh, gross, and sort of like 13-year-olds would be excited about the gremlin in the blender and the microwave, whatever. Like, that is a creature that you've come to understand is alive, being stabbed by a human.
Yes, and it doesn't die right away, which is great and awful. Mm-hmm. But it's the moment that the movie, that scene is the moment that just says, okay, all bets are off. This is real. People are going to get hurt, and the gremlins are going to die. But there's also that amazing laugh, which I remember so vividly theatrically, and Kate giggled at it this time when Francis Lee McCain pulls one knife out, thinks about it, goes back and gets another knife.
Yes.
And it's just this huge release after all of this monstrosity.
There are so many great moments like that too, where I think like Dante is a really good actor's director. I think something I love about really all of his movies is the naturalness of them, and the people really act like people. And I think, if you were to make Gremlins today with a different director, you wouldn't get that, because there would be so much at stake that it would be so controlled, and it wouldn't have that looseness of humanity that like especially the best horror movies has. It's what Jaws has. It's what The Thing has.
Idiosyncrasy. Just the room for people to be people in the middle of this preposterous situation. I wonder if, too, that Gremlins has the advantage of nobody really knowing what the tone is going to be, because there hasn't been a movie like this yet. It's a bunch of actors doing what they've been asked to do. Like Zach Galligan's performance is really... it's not timid exactly, but it's uncertain in a way that I find fascinating. A lot of scenes, he doesn't seem to know exactly what's going on. And either that's what Billy is, and that's perfectly fine if it is. Yeah, it works for the character. Or he's just trying to negotiate. It's, how can I put it? It's like watching someone dance while remembering the steps in their head, because there's clearly, like, there's cables at his feet, and you can only move this far before you cheat something else. It's a really self-conscious performance in a way that works for the film and for the audience, because we don't know what's going on. It puts us a little bit off our game is one thing, but it kind of destabilizes us.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, well, two things. I wonder if that performance, which is a really good performance and works in the movie, is part of the reason that he didn't really break out afterwards. Like, this was a huge movie.
Yeah.
And he should have been a star, especially in 1984. And he gives, like you say, it's kind of a small performance but it has to be, right? He's the center of all this chaos, and the puppet pops more than he does.
Yeah, he can't really be the hero. Gizmo has to be the hero. And he's great with the puppets. That's the other thing, too. Absolutely. I really, just even watching other actors in the scenes with the puppets, they're not as good as Galligan is. He's
except for Corey Feldman.
Corey Feldman is because he's a kid and he's fascinated by it, so that works too.
His reactions are so real through this movie. And was this his first movie?
It's his first major role anyway. I think he might have been in some small part. Wait, no. This was the same year as Friday the 13th Part 4. So yeah, I don't know which one came out first, but like he kills Jason. That's what happens in the final chapter. Corey Feldman is the hero.
I don't think I knew that. I haven't seen those in ages. Well, they all sort of blend together for me.
They do. 4 and 6 are the only ones that really stand out, because 6 is sort of meta and takes time to make fun of itself. And 4 is the one that has both Crispin Glover and Corey Feldman in it, and it's fine. Yeah, you have to watch it now. Crispin Glover?
I do have to watch it.
There is viral video of Crispin Glover dancing weird that comes from Friday the 13th, the final chapter. That alone makes it worth your time. And also, it's weirdly satisfying as a finale for the series, and they just kept making them.
Oh, interesting. I will watch it. I've been wanting to watch some of those again.
They're not great, but 4 and 6, and I'm weirdly fond of Jason Goes to Hell, because it's also just devoted to taking the piss out of itself. And then Jason X, because it was made in Canada and has David Cronenberg in it, so that's fun too. Also set in the future.
Wait, what?
I know, nobody's done a Friday the 13th movie yet. Yeah, it opens with I think it opens in 2002 or something. No, sorry, it was released in 98 and it's set around then, and then it leaps forward I think 400 years. Jason gets the idea that this is we'll cut this because no one will believe us. But the idea of Friday the 13th of Jason X is that the government has figured out how to kill Jason, or not how to kill Jason. That's the best part. They try to kill him or they actually do. Like the final Friday, Jason Goes to Hell, which I think is the 9th one, opens with Jason being just absolutely lured into a firing line, and a whole bunch of state troopers just gun him down and they kill him, flat out kill him. But then it turns out that his heart is like the alien from The Hidden, and it starts possessing people, and it's very, very dumb. But the movie leans into the dumbness, which is why I'm fond of it. And then in Jason X, Jason's still running around killing people. And the government has basically decided to just literally cryogenically freeze him and shoot him into space. Because then he'll be someone else's problem.
Amazing.
And that's what happens. A young woman is trapped and frozen with him in the prologue and mortally wounded. So she just sacrifices herself by launching the thing into space with him. And they're both cryogenically frozen. And because they've spent 400 years in space, they get thawed out. She gets saved by nanotechnology that's commonplace, like Star Trek healing.
Sure.
And then, of course, the nanotechnology, just like the electric blanket in the original Thing, thaws out Jason and fixes him up, and so he becomes a super hyped up version of himself. It's very dumb.
Amazing.
Yeah. But that's what these movies are. But yes, Corey Feldman is in Friday the 13th Part 4, and that gets us back. But no, he's great. He's terrific with the puppets,
he really
too.
is. I mean, I happened to see, as I was watching the commentary track, the scene where the orange juicer explodes in the kitchen and Corey Feldman is standing behind it, and like that kid reacts to that, and it's so charming, it's so funny. And so when you see him later shooting his slingshot at the Gremlins, you're like, yeah, I believe this kid, and I believe this would be his go-to solution.
Yeah, he's resourceful.
Yeah,
it felt that's the closest it came to Stranger Things for me, because the echo of Stranger, like that's clearly what the Duffer Brothers are chasing, and nobody talks about Gremlins in the Stranger Things verse. I mean, in terms of discussing the show, but it's clearly as much of an influence as Stephen King, It, or any of those things is.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was it the third season, the most recent season of Stranger Things?
The one with the secret project,
right?
Oh, that's right.
Like, it basically had Gremlins.
Yeah.
And I was kind of disappointed because it didn't have the thing, and I really love Stranger Things. Even when it doesn't totally hit, I think it's an interesting show. But it didn't have the thing that I think was so smart about Gremlins, which is they are chaotic, evil kids.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they can go after someone with a knife, but also they're going to shoot the letters out of the mailbox because it's funny.
Right.
Like, it feels like they are doing their evil because it's funny to them.
Yeah. Well, the laughing,
and that's something you've never seen.
Yeah, the laughing makes such a difference.
Yeah.
Right? Even if it was even though it's cackling and sometimes it's scary and sometimes it's just the Santa thing, ho ho ho, where they're taunting the cops through the car window. One of whom is Jonathan Banks,
right?
Which I remember that performance vividly. I did not remember the actor giving it. So it's just like, oh my God. Who would know 35 years later that he would become like this incredible dramatic counterweight as a presence? But he's also just having the best time.
It's really fun to see those scenes in the car. Like you never get to see Jonathan Banks scared.
Yeah, and he's scared of puppets.
Yeah,
that's his
great
thing. Turns out.
And I think again, like that's a real credit to Joe Dante, who has he understands the chemistry between actors, and he lets them. I don't know if he lets them play, but he plays it up.
Yeah.
Or he understands how to sort of capture that, because the stuff. I mean, all the bank stuff. It works so well where Polly Holiday is giving this enormous performance.
Yeah.
And Zach Galligan is very grounded and very small, but they are in this scene together and it works.
Yeah. There's a look that Phoebe Cates shoots her at one point that tells you how many times this has happened, which is just so weird and natural. And yeah, it's in the Deagle scenes, I think, are the closest to, and because we're also like we're shown directly that there will be resonances to It's a Wonderful Life. It's the closest it comes to a small town capper kind of movie. And I think there was probably an earlier version of this film that really is like what happens if a Frank Capra movie is invaded by monsters. And that's a darker film, right? Because it's about economic depression and it's about the town rallying together. And what happens here instead is that the town empties out. There's nobody in the movie at the end except our heroes. I think, like, other than Kate, it's all Peltzers. in the second half of the film. And it really struck me this time. I remember the one, I vividly remember the one scene where they try to get to the bank and everybody's running around with puppets on them. And there's a shot, and this time I really paid attention, there's a shot where someone in an upstairs window in silhouette is having his head either sawn off or garroted. Like there's a gremlin doing something in the top left corner of the screen, and it's vivid.
Oh, but my God.
They thought it through. It's that one big shot where they run into the bank. And there's stuff going on everywhere. And then there's nobody left. And the movie doesn't really deal with it, but nobody cares. Like, it's incredibly focused on Billy and Kate, which is fine. But at the very end, they mention something about rioters that got out of control, and Rock and Ricky is yelling on the radio about how they're massing outside the station. We never see any of that.
No, which is, I think, really smart. Like, having now, Ben and Acker and I have worked mostly in television, but we're sort of getting our feet wet in features. And trying to, listen, everything I do is inspired by Gremlins. So, like, looking at this movie from a plot and character point of view, where you are telling the story of Billy. Like, this is a coming of age story. Sure. This is about a kid learning responsibility in many ways. And so that first act is showing us the world and letting us know, like, here are the things that are getting out of his control. But then you open the world up. Right? And that's where we get the chaos in the streets and all the crazy fun gremlin stuff. But then it has to narrow again to be about this guy and his story and the people who directly are surrounding him. Like, you could do a lot worse than study this movie to learn how to write movies.
Oh, yeah. And it's also fascinating that it rushes through so much stuff. I had forgotten that all of the rules are broken within the first, 10, 20 minutes of Billy getting this thing. That his father's the one who's depicted as irresponsible but well-meaning, and Billy is the one who fucks it all up. He's the one who lets Pete get too close, like splashes Gizmo. He's the one who falls for the alarm clock trick, which is, again, a marvelous little moment of detail that the Gremlins know. Not only do they know how to tell time, but they know how clocks work, and they know that's what they have to tear apart to win. They want to become monsters. Yeah. The new Mogwai. And that retroactively explains that sorrowful look. Because the Gizmo puppet, there are so many different faces. There's so many different heads for it. And it struck me this time that the sad faces for Gizmo are really ugly. They're unpleasant to look at. And it's clearly intentional. Like, it's a contrast from soft, sweet, adorable. But he's got mucus and he's got, the gums are showing. But there's this one little shot of, as the new Mogwai are playing, of Gizmo just shaking his head sadly, because he's seen this all. Of course, he's seen this all before.
Right.
But the other Mogwai have maybe 5 seconds to establish character before the mayhem starts. And it does it. It actually establishes them as little jerks. They throw chicken bones at Billy at one point out of a box. The one that goes to the high school to be experimented on gets his own narrative where he's tortured and he gets his revenge. And it's there's so much investment in the puppets. Then there's so much heavy lifting that the audience is usually expected to do to fill in the blanks of motivation. But it's all there on the screen. And,
absolutely.
Of course Galligan is going to look smaller next to that because there's so much going on, and the fascination for us is to look at the puppets and the creatures and see what's going on. Yeah. But, it still has to come back to Billy as a narrative because, I would actually, now that I think of it, I was about to say you can't make a movie from Gizmo's perspective, but maybe that's the way into a new Gremlins movie. If it has to happen, you follow the character, you follow the hero, the real hero of all of these movies, who is this underestimated little hairball who just wants to sit at home and watch movies and play video games and not be bothered. It's a Rambo film, right?
Video games.
Yeah, it's like Rambo. It pays off the Rambo moment in the second film by having him do we get to win this time?
He'll never win. This is the fate of the Mogwai. It's why they're a tragic character. Also, it occurred to me. Two things that occurred to me on this recent viewing. One is you were mentioning, the Gremlins speaking and knowing how time works. That they're not just animals, and that makes it so much more horrific.
Yes.
When they are being burned alive.
Yeah. Well, and again,
horrifying.
that was Kate's response to the theater scene. He's like, "Oh my God, they're going to kill them all, aren't they?" And I was like, "Yeah, you have to. You have to kill them."
Dark.
Yeah.
But the other thing that had never occurred to me before was the Gremlins or the Mogwai have, like, are they the greatest point of evolution or the worst? Because on the one hand, they can't go in the sun.
Yeah.
That
Or near
seems
water.
terrible for an animal.
Yeah.
Or to have water near them. That is, 80% of the world. That seems like a terrible survival device.
It's
But then
self-limiting.
again, they become monsters that can almost survive anything.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say.
Yeah, it's weird that the film makes those declarations about the rules so clearly and never once pauses in either film. I think maybe there's a joke in Gremlins 2 about how when is it never after midnight. But
Well, I learned this from the commentary. So the rules was a late addition. The script. This script went through so many iterations, and I would be fascinated to read so many of the early ones. But the rule, like they were in product, they had a long production. They did 3 months of principal photography with all of the human actors, and then they took a break, and then they did 2 to 3 more months with all of the puppets. And any like the bar scene where Kate is fighting the Gremlins, like anything where the humans interacted a lot with the puppets.
Right.
So that's a huge time, and they were rewriting throughout.
yeah, it took
So,
3
like-
months to shoot the non-puppet stuff?
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
But there are a lot of stunts, I guess, and there are a lot of sets too. There are a lot of different setups. But like, so as the script was changing, so for example, the thing you mentioned about like it was Spielberg's idea to say Gizmo and Stripe are different characters. Keep Gizmo around. That came pretty late in the process, apparently.
Oh, wow.
And so they had already built the Gizmo puppet to do the things that it does in the first third with the idea that it wouldn't exist in the second 2/3.
Oh, wow.
And so they had to come up with the backpack conceit so that they could hide all of the puppetry.
Right.
So the rules came, I think, not until that second set of shooting with the puppets.
That makes sense.
And I think it was Spielberg again saying, like, we should lay out these rules to give people something to hang on to. And to me, it's so elegant, it's so perfect that, like, this is how you make a horror movie. You set up the rules are broken, there are consequences.
Yeah. And there's no time to argue about whether the rules apply, like, or what the
Exactly.
rules
And so-
should be.
Yeah, so Dante talks in this commentary track about, like, we showed this to audiences and we thought, when we say these rules, people are going to stand up and leave because they're so stupid. They're like, can't eat after midnight. Midnight where? Like, and he's right. It makes no sense. And he said that's why we put in a whole scene in Gremlins 2 to make fun of that conceit and blah, blah, blah. And, like, I think making fun of it takes away from it. Like, there's something to the confidence of saying, these are the rules of our world, get in line. you know? You either buy in or you don't, and people bought in.
Yeah, it's the purity of it too, I think. And the fact that a child is the one who delivers them at the beginning, even if it is, now that I'm thinking about it, only looped, you never actually see him make the speech. It is, don't get him wet. My instinct is just to add, there's enough liquid and whatever else. He's little. If you feed him a piece of chicken, it's got moisture in it. I could make that okay in my head, and I kind of wish someone had said it, but it's not necessary. There's lots of other things that aren't water.
Right, and I think part of these horror movies that work well is you don't nitpick. If you start to tug at these threads, it's good for people to have the answers. I assume someone has the answer. It was interesting to learn that in Gremlins they did not have the answer. But you feel like they have the answers to these questions. And that's kind of all we need. Like, you look at something like It Follows, which I think is one of the best horror movies of the last decade, and, like, the rules are very clear. And they can lay the whole movie on those rules and dealing with the breaking of those rules.
Yeah, and in both situations, right, it's people who are wildly unprepared for any kind of threat at all. They were both about comfortable suburban lives being shattered by the invasion of the thing that is the problem. Yeah. And in Gremlins, it's just a pet, and in It Follows, it's just sex. Like, it's stuff that happens, amped up to a metaphorical level that you cannot argue against as it's eating your face. Like, it's just like
right.
The beauty of Gremlins is that they are, this is the same year as Terminator, right? They can't be reasoned with, they can't be bargained with. They just want to have fun, but their fun is pulling people's faces off. And the moment of clarity that the film has about the Gremlins never comes, which I love. Me too. It comes close with the Snow White scene, where they, there's an innocence to that moment, but they also immediately start going about destroying the theater and punching each other and ruining it. There's never a moment where, it comes close in Gremlins 2 with the Tony Randall voiceover character, who the brain gremlin who talks and who therefore, can make a case for his life. They're, as you say, they're more than animals, but they're not people, right? Like, they're mimics. And that makes it a lot more fun. And it also explains the bar scene to me in a way that, where they come close, they're aping human behavior with the poker scene. And like that, there's that moment where it turns into a 40s film noir with a hard drinking private eye being pestered by the dame who invades his office is actually a hand puppet. It makes no sense at all. But if it took them all that time to get to the scene, then of course the puppeteers have just been sitting around coming up with ideas. And that sequence, what is it, 6 minutes long, where
it's so long. It
just stops being about Kate behind the bar and just goes off and follows all the other little side stories. And that's Joe Dante. Like, it's not a bad thing. It's the same way that the ending of Matinee is so inextricably tied to this projection device, the William Castle payoff, that only he cares about. Like, nobody in the movie, none of the characters in the movie, not even the John Goodman character, really cares about this thing that's happening during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He's built up this amazing energy around the story, which isn't about the reveal of this projector. And the trick is really cool, and it's something that William Castle could never have pulled off, a series of projectors that creates a three-dimensional, it's basically the thing that Ang Lee is involved in now with high def and high frame rate. But if it wasn't for Joe Dante, the bar scene wouldn't happen, or at least not the way, it would go directly from Kate being scared to Kate figuring out the Polaroid trick and leaving. And instead, it's the moment where, there's a Flashdance parody. Why not? And we got, there's a Peter Gabriel song and a Michael Sembello song, the guy who wrote Maniac. Why not? It's all happening. And
there's something and just to go back to it for a second, there's something in that, again, the tension between Spielberg and Dante that makes that work. That scene does go on a long time. And if I didn't love the movie, I think I would be sick of a couple of beats of that. I don't need that Flashdance gremlin. But I do need the flashing gremlin, and I do need the gremlin with the gun and the noir. So it's an arbitrary line for me, but it feels to me like the editor choosing those moments had both Spielberg and Dante looking over her shoulder, and had to find the middle, right? And I think that's where Gremlins 2, where it's so indulgent that it becomes not fun for me, where Dante's left to his own devices, it just fails as a movie in that way. It's a series of sketches. I mean, I think, the best thing to come out of Gremlins 2 is the Key and Peele Gremlins 2 sketch.
It's not inappropriate.
Because that has perspective on that movie.
I'm advising my clients to put all of their liquidity into canned food and shotguns. I have never stopped quoting that. It's been 30 years. But that is not a reason to canonize a film.
No. And there are great lines in the film, and there are great, I actually love that Tony Randall stuff. I love the mad science of it. It occurred to me in watching Gremlins this time that, for Joe Dante, the only kind of science is mad science.
Oh yeah,
that's all he believes in.
there are no good results.
No, and you see it at the inventors convention. You see it at when Billy brings the Mogwai to his science teacher, his former science teacher, who's clearly yes, I can do all the science.
Yeah. He's running some tests. He's never seen it. No one's ever seen anything like this creature before. And the other thing, too, is that it's before the internet. So, of course, they would rely on themselves, right? They would think that they have all the knowledge they need at the library.
Which is really fun. And I'd be curious to see that, how do you do this movie in this year, in the year 2021? I've already skipped 2020.
Yeah, nothing's happening in 2020.
I just can't. I can't. And like I know the animated series is coming out.
Is that still
HBO
happening?
Max. Oh yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
I didn't. Oh, okay.
But it's a prequel. It takes
Prequels.
place. I think it's the grandfather's story and how he came to get the gremlin, the Mogwai. I think that's the story.
Oh, that's not the worst idea, weirdly
no,
enough. Like,
I
a
think
little
it's
correction
great.
to the Orientalism of the movie, too, is not a bad idea.
Absolutely, and Z-Chun is running it, and he's a great writer. This is his first animated stuff, but he loves Gremlins as much as anyone. But he also wants to tell a personal story, and I think it takes place in the 20s in San Francisco.
Well, that could be really interesting.
It could be really cool.
Yeah. I was also very happy to see that Key Luke is giving a real performance in this movie. It's just that the film doesn't really have time for it. I had forgotten. I mean, I knew he spoke. I knew he didn't. He's not a heavily accented, quote unquote, 40s Chinaman image to fit with the 40s stuff the other 40s stuff that's going on.
Which is how I had remembered it. So I was pleased to see that he gives some depth to this character.
Yeah, and what's really interesting now, knowing that about him, is watching the first couple of minutes where he doesn't speak. He is watchful and silent with the wonky eye, and he feels like a big caricature right up until he immediately reveals that not only does he know what's going on, but he has no interest in any of this foolishness.
Yeah.
And he's kind of a moral figure, except that all he does is scold people, but they kind of deserve it. I mean,
Absolutely. He's a voice of reason among all of these people who have no reason.
Yeah. And
which is why you can see that, I think it's that performance lets you know that there's something to this character, that he can carry 6 or 8 episodes of whatever the prequel series can be.
Yeah.
There's story to him. There's story suggested by him. While we are talking about him, 2 brief things. Years ago, Acker and I were invited to, this was when Warner Brothers Digital had just started up, and they were just people were just starting to exploit the digital medium and also exploit their catalogs. And so we were invited to come in and look at the Warner Brothers catalog and pitch on anything that they had. And so we came up with a pitch that is still one of my favorite pitches we have ever had. Gremlins versus Goonies. It would have been for an animated series, 8 episodes, with the idea being that data from Goonies is related to the old Chinese man.
Sure. Well, the cap alone on the grand sign, right, is supposed to be a shout out to Short Round, so why not?
Absolutely, right. Because it's all Spielberg, because it's all Amblin, it's all of a piece.
Yeah.
So putting data in that situation, and then a Mogwai, Chunk steals a Mogwai, brings it back to their coastal town, the worst place to bring gremlins.
Yep.
And chaos erupts. It ends with a bunch of gremlins hanging off of the pirate ship and fighting as they go out to sea.
Right. This is basically
it was a lot of fun.
This is Stranger Things season 4 now. I
would hope so.
You pitched to Stranger Things before it was a Stranger Things.
Listen, we've been trying to do this stuff our whole career.
Yeah, it's true.
And it got through. Spielberg said yes. Dante said yes. Richard Donner was very protective of Goonies stuff at the time.
Aww.
And wouldn't allow any Goonies stuff to happen. And we since heard stories about how they tried to get an animated series off the ground and how it all got shut down. Not really because of Donner, but I think he was sort of burned by that situation. And so he was shutting down anything Goonies related, which was a bummer.
That's amazing. I interviewed Donner in 2010, I guess, because it would have been the 25th anniversary of Goonies, for a video thing. And he struck me as really genial, really willing to talk about anything, and absolutely sick of the Goonies. He was way more interested. He heard our dog barking, and that distracted. He's like, "Is that a hound? Do you have a hound?" He's like, "Yeah. Let me tell you how to handle hounds." And he gave me actual really good tips for dealing with a beagle.
All right, worthwhile.
Yeah. Oh no, it was a lovely conversation. But he clearly wanted to talk about anything other than the project that we were.
He's such an interesting director. Again, for sort of a similar reason that I think he's so good with actors. You watch those kids in the Goonies, and they are kids, and they are fun to watch. But you watch Superman, and it's a similar kind of thing where those actors are really playing people. He's bringing out the humanity in all these characters, and it's something I really miss that I think you got a lot in the 70s and 80s, and even into the 90s, but you don't get in a lot of big, billion-dollar movies anymore. But I think the Marvel movies are hopefully going to bring that back a little bit. I think you still get those moments in Avengers, for example.
I think it comes down to, I don't know if they did it intentionally with Downey, but by emulating that, by finding people whose persona already, like their screen persona already fits the character. Like Paul Rudd is just genius for Scott Lang, and even Cumberbatch for Stephen Strange is pretty good casting.
Absolutely.
And I'm really curious to see where the new wave goes, because I know Simu Liu a little bit, and he's going to be an amazing Shang-Chi, because he has wanted to do this his entire life.
Oh, I keep reading that. That's so exciting.
It's true. It's absolutely true. Like, he is someone who has always aspired to being an action hero and to play someone who discovers that he is one. Like, I don't doubt that's what he read in those are the sides they gave him to get the role.
That's so cool.
And he would have killed it. But the other thing too is that in the 70s and 80s, what you had was the resistance of Hollywood, right? The actors didn't want to make blockbusters. They wanted to make Jaws. They wanted to make a movie about characters that also makes a lot of money.
Right.
And so you have that pushback of new Hollywood influence and studios trying to package things. And now the packaging is the attraction.
Right.
So
yeah, that's true.
Everybody wants to be part of this so they can make 5 other indie films.
And 1984 was sort of the perfect fulcrum for that too, wasn't it? Where like you get Ghostbusters, you get Terminator, these movies where they are huge action, big budget movies, but the character moments are what make them great.
Yeah. Well, it's because the script had been, I think, kicking around for 2 or 3 years, right? In any case, they're coming out of, they're less indebted to Star Wars than they are to John Carpenter. Where,
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating, and I grew up at that point, so I was buying Fangoria when American Werewolf was on the cover. God damn it! But that was like, that also is a completely unexpected and almost counterintuitive horror movie where you have spectacular gore and deep tragedy presented with irreverence within the movie. Like, the characters are just wisecracking about being ghosts and zombies and self-loathing and all of that. And then you have Nazi dreams, where like John Landis is just throwing absolutely everything he has at this because he might never get another chance to do it.
I would love if there were more movies of that tone. I forgot about American Werewolf. Like, that's a good one. Like American Werewolf, Gremlins, Tremors. These Shaun of the Dead has a lot of that, although I think it's more outrightly funny. It's more outrightly a comedy. But
it functions both as comedy and horror at the same time, which is the reason that, to my mind, like, it's the same. Shaun of the Dead and Galaxy Quest are the two for me, where they are perfect mashups that require textural familiarity. Like, if you don't know Star Trek inside and out, you won't like Galaxy Quest as much. You can still enjoy it.
This is not true.
Really?
I don't know Star Trek at all.
Okay.
I have seen 2 Star Trek movies. I saw the first J.J. Abrams one, and I did not understand it. And I saw the one with the whales when I was a kid.
Voyage Home, sure.
I've never seen any of the TV shows. To me, Galaxy Quest is everything that I want Star Trek to be, but the stuff I've seen is not that.
Okay.
So, like, it has humor, it has heart, it has a big sci-fi story that I understand.
Right.
And I live in the world, so I understand the references. But it delivers on everything that it promises in the way that I think the thing it's making fun of never can.
I think you're right about that. For me, the textuality is the fandom, is the culture of the convention at the beginning and the end that bookends it, and it gives it that amazing payoff. That's why I think you need to have at some point in your life. I think it helps to have been that script really depends on the viewer being fully invested in Star Trek, like perhaps too much as a child, although that might just be my own experience. But yeah, if it works,
also,
then...
I mean, I think you're just a couple of years older than I am, but I think, fan culture became more universal.
Dominant, yeah.
Right, dominant for sure. But even as I was growing up, that I understood what that Comic-Con culture was at the time that Galaxy Quest came out.
Yeah,
So
I suppose
it didn't have to be specific to Star Trek. I knew what Comic-Con was, or a Comic-Con was. And I knew that there were Star Trek conventions or Star Wars conventions or whatever.
Yeah, and I guess by 99 it is pretty much established that that was already happening. I always want to forward date it into when fandom metastasized and became toxic, but it was already there in 99. It was already...
Absolutely.
And Galaxy Quest is more about the sweetness of it.
I think absolutely. And I think what I knew about Star Trek at that point was the William Shatner SNL sketch.
Right, Get a Life.
Right, which that tells you all you need to know about
That's true.
Star Trek fan culture. And then, like you say, that they're pointing to the sweetness of it and that these people love this thing. And that, that's a game changer.
Yeah. Oh, they are perfect movies. Galaxy Quest and Sean. They really are.
Someone has talked about Galaxy Quest on this podcast, right? Not yet?
Amazingly, no. I've had Enrico Colantoni on, and he talked about it for a second. Oh, well, you know the story, right? Like, he invented the Thermians.
What?
Oh, yeah.
No.
There's a featurette on the Blu-ray. But, yeah, his audition tape is the Thermians, and he was not coached. He built it in his head, and he just said, I have to figure out how they move. That's where it started for him. And he decided on the movements, the walking, and then he did the delivery, and they just started showing the tape to every other actor. And that's where that came from.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You know what? Now that you mention, I think I do remember listening to that episode, but that's fantastic. He is underrated as an actor.
Oh, no, he's amazing. His warmth for Mathazar and Galaxy Quest, and obviously for Keith Mars, his warmth is incredible, but he's also got this... And it's why he's perfect for Keith Mars, because he can also do hard stuff. He can also just harden himself in front of you. And then he showed up he's in A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood with Hanks. He plays Fred Rogers' producer, and he's got maybe 4 scenes, and he has a little bit of mystery to him as to what his motivations are. But he does it all with kindness in his eyes and squared shoulders. So you don't know how to take him. And it's Enrico Colantoni, who's the nicest man in the world. So your brain is telling you, no, he works. Mr. Rogers trusts him. He's fine. But because of this little posture thing he did, he becomes he's an enigma. It's fascinating.
Wow. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's great.
Put him in more stuff, everybody.
Absolutely. I would put him in the Gremlins movie where I have... that I'm building in my head right now. Because he could work.
Okay.
He
so
could
I've
work
been
with
doing
puppets.
this too.
Okay.
Since watching this the other day, I was like, how would I tackle Gremlins 3? Because I would absolutely make it a sequel.
Right.
Not a reboot. And I think it occurred to me this morning, and it really made me laugh. I think the way I would explain away Gremlins 2 is to say that someone in Kingston Falls wrote a book, or it was in the newspaper, and then that was optioned, and they made a movie of what they thought happened in Kingston Falls. But that
was Hollywood's
studios
Gremlins,
got
right?
involved,
Like that's their adaptation.
Exactly.
You completely hand wave it away.
I would absolutely do that with Gremlins 2. You guys didn't see that? It was on ABC in 1990. It was a TV movie.
How do you handle Billy? Would you bring back any of the characters?
I think you make Billy the Key Luke of Gremlins 3.
Okay. I'm seeing him more as a John McClane. Like, he's the guy who gets specifically the Die Hard with a Vengeance John McClane, if you're doing the third one, where he's just like, God
that much.
Damn it, why do I have to come back? Like, this is scarred. He's not terribly scarred. He and Kate have had a good relationship. Everything's fine, except that, he still has nightmares. He still has the scars on his chest. And,
sure.
It would be really nice to see him and Gizmo together again.
That's true. And I think, I can't remember how Gremlins 2 ended. Not that it's canon in my Gremlins universe, my GU. But I think Gizmo winds up with Billy and Kate.
Yeah, I think they all basically go off they leave the wreckage together. They all go off into the sunset.
So I think I would have Billy possessing Gizmo at the beginning of the movie, and then it's, whatever kid steals him or something like that. So that Billy has to come back at the end and be like,
right.
Will humanity never learn?
Right. They told me not to listen. They told me I wouldn't learn. I learned.
Exactly.
Yeah. How do you even stage a Gremlins movie now, though? I mean, it would obviously have to be CG, which would take away some of the magic, unless you go practical, which costs a fortune. And are there people still doing it? Is
I think there's
is
a
the text still there?
combination. Right, I think there's a combination approach. I mean, like I mentioned Attack the Block, which I think really did creatures well, which combined CG and practical. And there was something else I was watching recently. Even the Creepshow stuff, which I think looks great, and they've done a lot of those combined effect. I think and you said this before, like having the practical creature there for the actors to work with just does so much of the work for you. You can have the best actors in the world, and they still respond to tennis balls in a different way than they do to seeing the puppet.
Yeah. Okay, and then this is the way I get to ask the question, or I get to bring up the thing that I love the most about the first Gremlins and the sequel. What holiday gets a monologue in the third one? Because I realized, I can't believe it took me this long, but it was only this week that I realized that Kate's Christmas speech is the Indianapolis monologue.
Yes,
like it is. Sure. It is not only the moment that the movie stops dead so a character can reveal something about herself that is absolutely unnecessary in this case. I mean, I hate Christmas because of this hideous Gain Wilson cartoon example. But then to turn it on its side with the Lincoln's birthday thing, which
so dumb.
I love it. I love the fact that
I do love it.
Gizmo rolls his eyes. Gizmo has heard this shit before. I love that. But like, do you
it's such an interesting point in Gremlins because you do need a downbeat there. Like the rhythm of the movie wants you to take a breather. And this is honestly, like, this was not something I understood until we started doing Thrilling Adventure Hour 15 years ago, that like the audience wants a rhythm to a thing, and the audience which is why we have theme songs in our show and why we have fake ads in our show, is because the audience needs a minute to catch their breath and just have something that is purely emotional or purely funny, something they don't have to pay that close attention to. And I think that's, for me, especially watching this time, Kate's monologue, her Santa Claus monologue, if you pay too close attention to it, it's awful and doesn't work. But if you just sort of rest in the moment between gremlin attacks, in this way, it's unlike the Indianapolis monologue, because that really serves a deep purpose and tells you about that character. We kind of know who Kate is. Like, she's already told us she hates Christmas, and I'm willing to accept that she has her reasons.
Yeah.
So that moment to be just a breather absolutely makes sense. The movie wants it, and I know that it was something that the studio tried to cut before release, but that they really fought to keep in, not because it was important to her character, but because they needed that breather moment.
Yeah. I mean, it would just be relentless otherwise.
Yeah,
absolutely. And maybe the thing, if they cut that, then we would still have the scene of Judge Reinhold in the bank, but I don't know that would have the same impact, right? Because it would be a focus on a character that we also never see again.
Exactly, and kind of forget about.
Yeah, there's like, it's true. I don't miss him. I don't miss that scene. I know it exists, but I don't ever need to see it.
Yeah, which is the way I feel when I see like most deleted scenes on DVD extras. It's like, yeah, I get it. I get why you cut that. We don't need it. So I would not give her a holiday monologue. I would give her a monologue about her marriage to Billy and how early on in their life they faced the hardest thing they thought they would ever face. But it turns out that was not the hardest thing they'd ever have to face.
Okay. Could be about an anniversary. That's a hook.
If that helps you, sure.
I mean, if it happens on their anniversary, that could work too.
That's fine.
It's just a great way of having him be generally distracted anyway, and then rocket into whatever's going on. But then, I'm still trying to make it about Billy and Kate, and it can't. It shouldn't be, right? It's only because
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's because I grew up with the characters, so they'd be roughly the same age, and I'm still identifying with them. But Gizmo, who is presumably this 750-year-old freak of evolution, I think the only thing that I want to see that I should never see, that no one should ever do, is a giant gremlin.
No.
Dante clearly would love to do a Godzilla movie with a gremlin, right? Something of scale. But,
it's a different movie.
Yeah, and you turn a spotlight on it and it's over. Like, there's no...
Exactly. we got that guy. Like, where's he going to hide come dawn?
Yeah, it's a limited appeal.
And I do remember, I read an interview with Chris Columbus not too long ago although I think it was an old interview, talking about where Gremlins first came from. And I think it was hearing squirrels in his attic or something like that. And it was the idea of not one big monster, but hundreds of little monsters, right, and what that would do to your life. It would cause chaos in your life. And like, yeah, that's why you can't have a big gremlin. That's kind of why you can't have a gremlin with too much intelligence and still make it scary. You know?
Yeah, no,
because Gremlins 2 is not scary. That's my big problem with Gremlins 2 is it's a comedy, and that's fine. But to me that's not what Gremlins is. Gremlins gets to be as scary as it is funny.
Yeah, it's the Looney Tunes thing, right? I mean, there's a moment in Dante's Twilight Zone the movie short, which is I'm assuming you've seen that at some point. That movie has sort of vanished into the past, mostly because of the fact that 3 people were killed in it, and the story behind that is horrifying. But those 2 of those segments, the George Miller and the Joe Dante, are amazingly well realized.
Yeah.
And the thing that Dante does in his episode is, it's a good life. It's the kid who can make anything happen, and everything is Looney Tunes related. It's not like full on, but there's a moment where they manifest something that looks like the Tasmanian devil would look, and it's terrifying.
Yeah. And
that's what Gremlins is, where it's giddy and silly, and it's got this old school entertainment spirit, and Chuck Jones appears in the film for 5 seconds, and like he's one of a dozen cameos that sort of tell you where this movie's heart lies. Mm-hmm. And then in the second one, in the new batch, he goes full on Warner Brothers animation, and that can't be scary. Like it ceases being dangerous.
Yeah. It's a really hard balance. And again, I think it's why we haven't seen that many movies with this kind of tone. Even though like Gremlins was a huge hit, I think Shaun of the Dead was a pretty big hit. Like, people love these movies, but I think they're hard to make. There's a great movie, you must have seen this movie, Housebound.
Yes, the New Zealand film. Or Australia.
Which I think strikes that. I think New Zealand, which strikes that tone. Because there's great comedy in it, but it is legitimately scary.
Yeah.
It is for horror fans. It's not for the casual fan, but there's real laughs in it, too.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea that the hero's first impulse when she's confronted with a ghost is to punch it and just run away. Because that's what I would want to do. I think
that's something that all of these movies, and really, even Jaws is, people acting like people, right? Like, I think that's part of why people responded to Get Out, and in addition to all of the masterful work that it does, those characters act like people. Like when he sees that shit is bad, he wants to get out of there. Like he's not going to investigate it like in an 80s horror movie.
Yeah. No, Peele's genius, I think, in both Get Out and Us, is that those films are about social situations. Like they're about being awkward in a room full of people and not knowing why. Which instantly, like, I'm on board, no matter that none of this film is my experience. I get it. I know where they're coming from, or at least on a most basic, like, medulla level.
It's absolutely relatable. Yeah, it's a situation we've all been in, taken to a metaphoric...
horrific extreme. Yeah. But to that end, I mean, is there anything in Gremlins that you have particularly leaned on or cited or referenced or stolen? I can't think of any thrilling adventure specific.
Not thrilling adventure, and we talk about it every once in a while because Acker likes the movie too. He's not a devotee in the same way I am. He's a Ghostbusters man through and through, which I think does show in Thrilling Adventure. But we haven't, because the creatures in Gremlins are not characters. They don't have wants other than kill, crush, destroy. In Thrilling Adventure, however, we tend to have a ghost or a mummy or whatever the monster is wants something.
Sure.
Or has a personality. And if we were to do that with a gremlin, we did a little bit with elves and stuff like that, which touched on it, but it just doesn't play the same, because part of the fun of Gremlins is the chaotic, almost animal nature, right? The shadow version of ourselves,
right?
That I think is like, that's the fun of Gremlins to me.
Yeah, I mean, I could see Sparks Nevada chasing a bunch of them around, but that's just.
But even that, like, if we got to do the cartoon, for sure we would.
Yeah.
But in audio, it doesn't really play. In the stuff we're working on these past couple of years, I come back to it a lot. We're working on a family horror drama that we're sort of out shopping right now, but it's a script that Ben and I broke together, and then I wound up writing in the first draft because there was something in it that was really speaking to me. And part of what I both consciously and unconsciously took from Gremlins in this script is it takes place in the winter. It takes place in a small town. In my case, it's on Cape Cod, so it's in a real place, but it's a place, Cape Cod even now is still somewhat outside of time. Mm-hmm. They're about 15 years behind the rest of us in many ways, but especially in the way things look and feel there. And so that was consciously like pulling stuff that was important to me in Gremlins. I love that it takes place in winter. I love that you see these creatures in the snow. That to me is a grounding element that makes the thing real and makes it resonate. So yeah, that's something we play with. We're working on a feature which there are rules set up. It's a horror feature, and it's much more, it's less comedic than Gremlins is, and it's less comedic than a lot of other stuff that we've done, but the idea that there are rules set up to this world, and the elegance of those rules, and the understanding of those rules and what happens when they are broken or followed plays out in the course of this feature that we're working on. I mean, I did a comic book series a couple of years ago for Vertigo, for DC, called Hexwives, about witches. And a big part of that, which wasn't part of my initial pitch, was figuring out the rules of this world. Because generally that stuff I don't care about. Like, I want to live in the characters and I want to see how they react in the moment. And I think that's something that comes from Gremlins too, is Gremlins as well, not the sequel. That there's something about, we don't get flashbacks in this movie. The one sort of flashback we get is Kate's speech about her father. But all of these other characters, we understand their situation and desires just based on dialogue. And the rest of their journey is them dealing with what's directly in front of them. And that's something I love in a movie. That's something I always want to see. Flashbacks tend to distract me. And I just want to see people moving forward and showing who they are through their actions and the decisions they make. And so that was my pitch when I was pitching Hexwives, was here's the situation they're in. And the conversation I got into with my editors was, like, they wanted to know about the world. And, okay, there are witches and they are immortal, but you keep showing them dying. So how does that work? I'm like, oh my God, you're right. We have to have rules. And like that really hit home. And I absolutely went back and watched Gremlins, as well as a couple of other things, to be like, all right, how do they lay out the rules in a way that it doesn't start to take over the story? Because that is a danger, I think, in a lot of these kinds of stories.
Yeah, and it's true, by making them as simple as possible and then just refusing to engage with them beyond that limit. That's the best way through.
Unless it drives more story, or unless it can tell you more about character. I really think that's the way to do it. And especially in a movie where you only get, 90 minutes to 2 hours, it's got to be a shark. It's got to be spare.
Yeah.
It's just got to move forward.
Okay, one other thing. If you're doing a Gremlins 3, would you add or subtract a rule? Would there be, like, what's the writerly challenge? Would you find out one new thing? Because I always think about how Back to the Future needed to come up with just Marty doesn't like being called chicken. And it's dumb. It works. But it's like the movie basically in 2, they kind of have to just go, look, it never came up. You just never heard it.
Right.
Just go with it. We need context.
It's
we need
4
conflict.
years later. Just get on board with this.
Yeah. And with Gremlins, I keep thinking, like, with a mythology this simple, there must be something else. There must be something, because the only reason I would want to see a sequel or to experience any continuation of the story is for the surprise. For the, it's about Key Luke's character. That's a surprise that I'm on board with. If you're doing something else, like, what would you do to make it interesting?
I think what I want to see, and maybe it's not what everyone wants to see, but this is my instinct, is not to dig deeper into the mythology of the Gremlins, but to see what they are like in a world 35 years later.
Right.
This world is very different to 1984. And I love seeing And I'm trying to remember where I may have, like, I can only think of bad examples of movies that have done this, like Predator 2, but, like, I want to see the monsters that I know and love in a different situation.
Right.
So I want to set the Gremlins loose in a city to see what happens. And to set them loose in a city in 2021, which is a very different world than small town 1984. And what does that mean for, the way they are dealt with and the characters that have to deal with? I think I'd widen the canvas rather than go deeper.
My thanks to Ben Blacker, who's off pitching that Gremlins sequel right now. While he's doing that, go subscribe to the Thrilling Adventure Hour, the Writers Panel, and Dead Pilot Society on your podcast platform of choice, and maybe grab the trade paperback of Hexwives while you have a chance. Like everything else he does, it's clever and funny and even richer the second time through. You can find Ben on Twitter at Ben Blacker, all one word, and you can find Gremlins on 4K, Blu-ray, and DVD from Warner Home Entertainment. It's also available on Apple TV and Google Play, and streaming on HBO Max in the US and Crave in Canada. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com, where I'm hosting a bunch of other podcasts these days. Go check them out. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network. And make sure to check your podcast feed on Friday because something's coming. I'll see you then.